Hi, Daniel Baden here. There are so many entrants into the world of natural medicine, so many products coming out, but most of them are derived from marketing companies. Every now and again, you find a gem, and a gem to me is where someone who actually knows what they're doing, has a lot of experience, has brought their knowledge and experience to the development of a product. I think it makes all of the difference. So, very luckily today, we have Professor Hugh Dunstan. Hi,
Hi
Hugh.
Daniel,
How are you, mate?
very good, thank you.
Good. You're a professor of biological sciences,
Correct.
retired.
Retired, yes.
And what's been the essence of your work? I mean, you published, is it 125 papers?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I had my learning during my PhD in the UK, and at that stage we were pioneering what's now known as metabolomics. Not claiming to be the initiator of it, but we
Right.
used to call it metabolic profile.
Uh-huh.
And it was a really great technique because it just lets you, with no bias, look at biological samples and pick out what's there and what's changing. So there's no preconception. It's a really great approach to doing some biological research.
So what are samples?
So we actually developed the techniques using very simple cell systems. I did a lot of work with bacteria,
Right.
and then progressed to actually working with fungi.
Right.
And then on to mammalian cells, and then body systems. So we could look at body fluids, urine and sweat and blood,
Right.
and it's just emerged from there.
So a lot of your work was examining the content of various fluids that come out of a human body, or
Yes.
other cells as well?
It's all around homeostasis.
Right.
So
Okay.
to give you an example, when the blood that's pumping around the body, we consider that now as a reservoir, and it's maintained very tightly.
Yeah.
You know, it's very tight balances of concentrations of all of the nutrients and so forth, and then there's stuff that's coming from the heart that is enriched, so pumped by the heart, enriched through the liver and topped up, and then it's picking up some of the waste material coming back, which then the liver takes out. So depending whether you're taking arterial or venous blood, it's very consistent.
Right. And then I suppose there are specific challenges to the body which change the ratios of some of these nutrients potentially. And I'm guessing there might be extreme exercise or particular disease states, potentially genetic modifiers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The genetic ones are great examples because certain metabolites can just be missing or in very low concentration because they're not dealt with appropriately. But the challenges from infection, there's a huge response there, and you can see shifts.
Right.
In what happens. But having said that, the blood circulating still stays pretty
Okay.
constant.
So these shifts would be in the various vitamins, minerals, and amino acids.
Yeah, and there was a really interesting dilemma with people working with chronic fatigue back in the 90s and the 2000s, and people getting very interested in magnesium and calcium, for example.
Yep.
And what they were finding is that the levels were perfectly normal in the blood, but then when they could do bone density and look at nutrient concentrations in tissues, the body is actually being essentially drained of these to keep the constant supply in the blood.
So that's fascinating. So the body's robbing the pool of nutrients from somewhere to help us live.
Yeah. And another classic example of that is when you have an infection, you get tired and you lie down and your muscles effectively shrink because they are being broken down to provide the amino acids it needs to mount the immune response.
Yeah, okay. So there are many factors involved, many different types of nutrients in the body, but your work has orientated to, I say amino acids, you say amino acids. We're probably both right, let's just go with that. And so your focus over time has gone more towards these amino acids. How's that come about?
So back in the 1990s, we started looking at people with chronic fatigue, and we took a very open-ended view of it. We didn't think that amino acids were necessarily a key thing, but what we did was to measure amino acids and fatty acids and organic acids and just look to see what was changing in the people who were presenting with chronic fatigue. And it kept coming back to certain amino acids that were obviously indicating this muscle breakdown, and that got us interested in that. We also got very interested in the essential fatty acids. And then working with patients with chronic fatigue is terribly difficult because it's such a diverse, presentation.
Yes.
And it takes 6 months before they even pass the diagnosis test.
Yeah.
So you can't get at the starting. And so we started to think, well, let's look at a group of athletes where we could actually then sort of monitor their progression through the exercise and then in their fatigue state and what's happening there.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, we also developed an animal model, which everybody wants you to do, and we worked with horses.
Right.
And it provided great insight because the horses, there's no complications. They have daily regimes of feeding, they don't take drugs, they don't take alcohol, they don't do strange things. So we were able to get some terrific insights from them. And what happened was that we began to find that the amino acids were varying in urinary output, pretty constant in the plasma section, in the circulating blood, and we then started looking at sweat. And that was the real game changer because we could then see what was being lost in sweat. And people knew that amino acids were being lost in sweat for decades.
Right.
We've got old publications, but nobody cared.
Yeah.
Nobody said, well, what does that mean in the context of your body supply? And we found that there were 6 amino acids, which we now call the high demand amino acids.
So the high demand amino acids.
Yes.
Right, okay.
And they called that because they're lost 10, 15 times faster rates in sweat than the other amino acids.
Right.
They're what we call functional amino acids, so they're used in the body for all sorts of things, from osmoregulation to providing hormones, to building neurotransmitters, to building cytochromes, Hem for hemoglobin. They're just used in so many things that as a functional amino acid, they are in hot demand for metabolism, but they're also being excreted at very high rates.
Right. So potentially, if someone's either gone through a chronic disease phase, perhaps a post-viral syndrome, or they're under constant duress through excessive exercise, or I'm not sure what excessive exercise is, maybe you can tell me, because I'm not sure how much you use if you're just going for a walk every day and with a bit of sweat, or whether you're really pushing yourself every day, and if that makes much of a difference to anything. And therefore, how do we assess what's important there?
Okay, so when you sweat, most people don't realise this, but if you're sitting around not doing much, you can lose 500 mils a day through sweat. Right. And if you are exercising, you can lose easily up to 2 litres. Some people lose more, 2.5 litres per hour. So it's a big contribution to your fluid balance.
Right, okay.
Now you asked about exercise, what is extenuous exercise?
Yeah.
Well, if you, another way of thinking about it is this loss cumulative? And that begins to provide an answer to the question. So if you go out and do a big bike ride, and if you're absolutely worn out and your muscles are tired and aching, and you've lost a lot of amino acids through supporting exercise and through sweat, you need time to recover.
Yes.
Now you've lost more of these high demand amino acids than the other. So if you don't give yourself 2 or 3 days appropriately to recover and replenish, and you go for another bike ride the next day, you're starting off low.
Deficient.
And if you keep on doing that, you're going to progressively go down in terms of your availability of these high demand amino acids.
Well, I guess that brings us to a question around what you can take from food, because there's essential and non-essential amino acids. So do you think you can get enough from food in an adequate amount of time, or could you differentiate for our listeners what the difference is between the essential and non-essential amino acids is?
Sure. It's a question we get asked a lot, and one of the projects we did was to try and model the intake of proteins and the utilisation and the excretion. And when you look at plant-based proteins versus animal proteins, just in the general composition, they don't actually differ that much. You know, the percentages are about the same, give or take, depending on the origin. So histidine might be 2 or 3% in both plant and animal proteins.
Right.
However, you then get to specific proteins like collagen, for example, where glycine represents 33% of the content of that protein.
Right.
In hemoglobin, histidine is 8% of that. So it's skewed, so there's a higher demand for some of these specific amino acids in the proteins.
Right.
So in a diet, you would have to eat a good amount of protein to adequately supply these high demand amino acids. Or if you're eating meat, meat is bathed in a thing called carnosine. And carnosine is terribly important, if you like, buffer. It's an antioxidant. Your brain's absolutely soaked in it. All your muscles are soaked in it, and your body has to have a good supply of this. Now, if you eat meat,
Yes.
you're getting this extra hit of carnosine,
Right.
which happens to be made of histidine.
Right. Okay.
Now, there is no plant equivalent.
I see. I see.
So it's really interesting, and you know, when you look at vegetarian diets, there is no equivalent to the carnosine, and so a lot of people ask us about, is this related to the anemia in any way that they can get, especially if they're exercising heavily? And so in that case, they may well consider carnosine supplementation or histidine supplementation, for sure.
Right. Okay. So if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, and you're taking same amount from meat of histidine, you're going to need presumably some other sort of cofactor to convert it to carnosine. Do you know what that cofactor is?
No, well, I can tell you the pathway in which carnosine's made.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you know of any specific cofactors that are needed
No.
for it, but basically, if you actually take carnosine as a supplement, it's basically broken down in your stomach acid.
Yep.
To form histidine and beta-alanine.
Okay.
So
okay.
you might as well just take histidine.
And alanine?
No, beta-alanine is actually a breakdown product from some of the purine nucleotide.
Okay. Yep.
The body has no problem in taking. Beta-alanine is actually a very much favourite supplement because you get a real buzz out of it. It's very much a stimulant.
Yeah.
And you see it in sort of pre-learning supplements for exercise.
Right.
Because you just get this buzz.
Okay.
But you don't need it.
Fantastic. Well, it's so interesting because I mean, so many people are tending towards a vegetarian, vegan type diet these days. So if they are plant-based and they're exercising heavily, they're at the risk of depleting their carnosine stores, and therefore a supplement is completely required if they want to continue exercising. Otherwise,
It's suggested very helpful. Yes.
yeah. Otherwise, what's the long-term potential risk of not updating your carnosine?
Well, I think you end up risking a lack of performance.
Right.
You know, you're not going to be able to perform at your best. You get a higher risk of oxidative damage.
Right.
That's a big factor of what carnosine does in situ in the muscles and in the brain.
Yep.
But remember too that the histidine is vital for making hemoglobin,
Right.
protein.
Yep.
And there are a couple of studies that actually show if you deprive people of histidine in a diet,
Yep.
They become anemic.
Right.
You put histidine back,
Yep.
and they're no longer anemic.
Right.
So it's actually a very important factor in the diet, and we know that it's really important not just for the carnosine and hemoglobin production, but as a secondary, that comes back to oxygen delivery. If you're low hemoglobin.
Yep.
You're not going to be able to deliver your oxygen where it's needed.
And therefore not performing quite as well. Yeah, okay. So you mentioned earlier that the brain was rich in carnosine, or washed with carnosine. And does that mean, if you know, that has some involvement in cognitive function as well?
I honestly can't answer that,
Okay.
but it would be my intuitive guess it would.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's so critical to providing the platform, if you like, for efficient operation of metabolism.
Yeah.
To have the various things. It's an anti-chelating agent, an anti-glycating agent, it's an antioxidant, so it fulfills some pretty important functions.
Yeah. And you may not know the answer to this one either, but natural medicine and medicine has known about amino acids. We know that the building blocks of proteins and important to so many structures and function in the body, yet I don't feel they've had the focus from any form of medicine that you're bringing to the table, and your experience is bringing to the table. Why do you think that is? What's kept amino acids, do you think, a little bit offside?
I guess you're delving into biochemistry, and I know a lot of people don't like biochemistry or physiology.
Right.
But I think that it has in places. There's been some very good reviews in the last 10 or 12 years about trying to get out there the concept of these functional amino acids, and they're a group of amino acids, not just our 6 high demand ones, but there are other ones like tyrosine that are precursors to forming adrenaline and so forth. They just modulate so many things, including growth, cell repair, hunger, for example. There's a huge range of things that they actually are involved in. And quite a few people have tried to put this out in the review, but I guess those people, like myself, are not clinicians. And to try and get the clinicians, the information to the clinicians in a form that is readily acceptable, usable, is hard.
Yeah.
It's been a challenge in monitoring it for sure.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So what are the 6 HDAAs, or the high demand amino acids? Which ones are they?
So there are 2 essential. There's histidine, we've mentioned, and lysine.
Yep.
Then there's serine and glycine, and I've got to say glycine's right up there amongst the highest of them all, for so many reasons. And then there's ornithine, which is interesting. It's a non-protein amino acid, and it's really important in again, so many functional things. But one of the chief ones is it is used in the urea cycle to help get rid of waste ammonia.
Okay.
And if you don't have that, then you end up with ammonia toxicity. And then the final one is aspartic acid.
Right, okay.
Which is a really interesting one, because when you measure that in the blood, in the plasma, there's virtually none.
Right, okay.
And don't ask me why, but it appears in the sweat, appears in the urine, and interestingly, it's in the red blood cell, but it is not.
So is there a store of it in the amino acid pool in the body somewhere?
That's a very good question. We don't store amino acids like we store fats.
Right, okay.
If you like, the equivalent is in the muscle proteins. My guess would be most of that is in the collagen fibres in the muscle tissues themselves. But it's the other place where there is a lot of amino acids, free amino acids, is the red blood cell.
Right, okay.
And that's a discussion for another day. That's really interesting.
So that means if we're not stored, because when I went to study nutrition many years ago, there was often talk about the amino acid pool, but what we're saying is that all amino acids that are taken are basically immediately used in some sort of functional capacity, whether it's building muscle, building collagen, building red blood cells, other immune cells as well, and that's what the pool is basically.
Well, the pool you can think of, I call it a reservoir that's circulating in the plasma.
Right.
And we could include the red blood cells in that. And so what happens is when you suddenly start going for a walk or riding, then the body switches on what we call the catabolic response, which is this breakdown of
Yeah.
muscle proteins to
Yeah.
provide into the circulation to replace those deficits.
Right, okay. Are amino acids safe? Can you ever overdose?
I think you can probably overdose on anything, but
Yeah.
they are safe. The food standards of Australia and New Zealand actually have specific limitations on what you can put into a product for a daily serving.
Yeah.
And so that is all we can work off. But having said that, when you actually start looking at the needs, which we've done in modelling of people who might be exercising, you know, if you've got a professional athlete who's training 6 hours a day, they're going to need more than you and me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's worthwhile looking at that, and that's in some ways quite easy to do when you measure what they're losing in sweat. If they're sweating 2 litres an hour, we can work out how much of these amino acids they're losing, and you can just replenish them quite safely.
Yeah, and when you are replenishing, is there a better time to replenish? Like, say you're going for a run and can you just put them in your drink bottle and have it as you're going, or is it better to have them before you go out training or afterwards?
Very good questions, and I think it's something that a lot of people just don't consider.
No.
So you hear a lot about pre-workout supplements.
Right.
You can actually use our Optimate as a pre-workout supplement, say 40 minutes or an hour before you are going to begin your exercise. And if for no other reason, it helps you hydrate before you start exercising. Most people don't. A lot of people, I'm told by trainers and coaches, arrive at practice dehydrated.
Right.
And they arrive at work dehydrated. So
Right.
even if you have some water, that's
Yeah.
good. But if you can get some of these amino acids into you before, that helps. When you're exercising, your stomach digestion shuts down.
Yep.
So you don't actually, if you take a protein drink, it just sits there. It
Yep.
doesn't get digested.
Right.
So these amino acids are readily taken up,
Yep.
easily absorbed very rapidly. Evidence suggests 10-15 minutes into the system doing stuff.
Right.
And so if you're going for an hour's bike ride or run, you can take a drink bottle, sip it on the way, just keep topping up.
Yep.
But then certainly at the end, if you're playing say a game of rugby or soccer or something, definitely take it within, the sooner you can take it after your exercise, the better.
Okay. Right.
For sure, because it's an interesting thing, because your digestion doesn't completely stop, but more or less does, and it stays hindered for 2, 3, 4 hours after your exercise,
Right.
depending on the intensity. And so that means your body wants to start repairing and recovering. It's still breaking down your muscle tissues,
Yeah.
muscle
Right.
proteins.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so if you can get it in there as soon as you can after that.
So under physical stress, your body is diverting blood supply away from the gastrointestinal
Yes.
tract to the muscle to make the muscles work better.
Yep.
And then it can take 2 or 3 or 4 hours to bring the blood supply back and create a proper absorption.
Yep.
Right, that is absolutely fascinating. Okay.
That's more of an extreme, you know, if you're going for a very long ride or,
Yeah.
or high intensity work
Right.
for a prolonged period, but usually 1 to 2 hours.
Yeah, sure. What about just normal stress? You know, for someone like an executive in the city who's just full on, busy, super day, not eating properly, maybe not drinking enough, too much coffee, all that sort of stuff. Are these HDAAs, these high demand amino acids, appropriate for them?
Absolutely. Basically, part of the fight-flight response, which
Yep.
is when you start exercise, is an adrenaline surge, and that's
Right.
a lot of what triggers, you know, the changes in your circulation. It's diverting blood flow to your muscles. So digestion's not going to be really good for those high stressful situations. And yeah, they might be in suit coats, but they'll be sweating. You
Yeah.
don't necessarily feel it or notice it.
Well, we can tell because I use lots of deodorants. So yourself, together with Professor Tim Roberts and another research scientist, Margaret McDonald, have brought together your skills to create this company called Innovate. I presume in these, and I'm guessing, that in these products, you've been able to create the exact ratios required for most people most of the time. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We did this modelling project, and what we've tried to do is to get the proportions right to match those components that are needed the most.
Right.
And actually in our detailed research, we found there are at least 3 different types of people. You know, there are those that sweat a huge amount, medium amount and low amount, and they have different proportions of losses.
Right.
But basically overall, they've still got major losses of histidine, glycine as the major ones, to say that's in there in the highest abundance, and then the others are tailored.
Yeah, okay, okay, got it. So, how do the Innovate amino acids differ from just some of the electrolyte formulas that are on the market?
Yeah, so basically what we've done is to provide the amino acids we know are lost in the highest proportions. We've also done work on electrolyte losses, and this is not entirely new because they've been doing it for years with Powerade and Gatorade, actually, with the original. But most of the electrolyte drinks do not have the full spectrum of electrolytes. Some of them will have some sodium, potassium, sometimes magnesium, but you really need those 3 plus calcium as well, and the potassium is really important. And a lot of them don't actually deliver sodium as sodium chloride.
Right.
Chloride's just as important as sodium.
Right, okay.
And a lot of them have sodium malate or sodium citrate instead.
Right.
Because it tastes better.
It's more soluble.
More soluble, exactly.
Mm.
So this is really the main difference we have, and most of the electrolyte formulations, of course, don't have amino acids. There are a couple out there that do, but they have the branch chain.
Yeah, okay.
Now the branch chain amino acids taste like pond water.
Yes, I know.
They're not good, and to be honest, they're not lost in any great amount. It's interesting, if you look at the modelling, there's about, I think it was about 20 or 25 times more of the HDAA are lost than the branch chain in urine.
Yep.
And it's something like 7 or 8 times more HDAA are lost than the branch chain in sweat. So the loss is much, much greater. And also the utilisation as functional amino acids is far, far greater in the body.
Yeah.
So providing the branch chain, yes, they do work, and they do provide good results. There's lots of studies on that. But if you provide the HDAA, you actually are reducing the amount of breakdown of muscle proteins, and therefore you are reducing the losses of the branch chains.
Right, okay. So I'm just going to talk about me for a second. In preparation for meeting you, I acquired some of the Innovate product, and I started taking it, and I was doing some long cycling trips. I used to get a lot of cramping in my hamstrings, but I noticed that has almost gone.
Wow.
And I was taking magnesium by itself for a long time, which helped a bit, but not quite as much as this. Can you explain what's happening to me?
Yeah. So when you doing your long exercise and your bike, you're running out of both electrolytes and the HDAA. Now, a lot of people replenish at the end, thinking they're rehydrating by taking water.
Right.
And if you take water alone, the body is an amazing thing. It's worth explaining, because when you're doing that exercise, you're sweating, the volume of your circulation actually shrinks so that it can keep the same concentration of electrolytes, sodium and so forth, in the circulating plasma.
Right.
If you suddenly add water, it expands again and you've diluted it. And
Right.
that's what causes a lot of the cramping. So there's been studies showing if you provide the right electrolytes and also the amino acids really help the body to maintain the muscle integrity.
Yep.
And prevent that cramping.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm grateful for it. So,
Very pleased to
you've got two products here. One is the Electrate, which is the HDAA amino acids, and one is the Optimate, 6 aminos.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference?
So the Optimate is just the 6 high demand amino acids. There's nothing else in there. There's no flavours. There's no enhancers or anything. And it's designed as a pre-workout formulation or daily use.
Yep.
So you can imagine if you're just busy in a day, you can accumulatively lose the HDAA, and that leads to poor collagen replacement and just general lack of well-being. The Electrate is the same amino acids with the electrolytes.
Right.
And so that's designed for hydration.
Yeah.
Having said that, there's nothing wrong with taking the Electrate as a daily thing as well. There's not a huge amount of, you'll see that some of the other electrolyte products have much higher concentrations of sodium and so forth than ours. But what we've found, and we haven't been able to publish this research because basically COVID knocked it out, we only had a very intense study on not enough people, but the evidence showed that the provision of the HDAA actually helps resorb the sodium from the sweat bath.
Okay.
So that's really important. So taking the electrolyte, the Electrate as you are exercising helps retain your sodium and chloride.
Okay, that's really. How do people get hold of this product? How do you buy it?
On the website at the moment, our Innovate website, innovate.com.au. It's a very simple website and process of ordering along that. We only have those 2 products.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. And look, thank you for your time. It's so exciting to meet the researchers behind the products, and it just brings a level of genuine belief and accessibility to understanding what this product's about. And I'm really grateful you've applied your, I want to say 30 something years of.
Probably it's been more than that.
More than that? I'm trying to be generous here, Hugh.
We'll run with 30.
Years of experience to these products, and that is what makes the world of difference and success clinically and also to the athletes. So thank you so much, Hugh.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you.